computer. All right, thank you guys for coming on out this evening. We are going to be taking on the next chunk of Genesis. We took on chapter 1 and 2 last week. We're taking on chapters 3, 4, 5, and the first 4 verses of chapter 6. The reason we're splitting chapter 6 is the beginning of chapter 6 is its own mini standalone story. And then the rest of chapter 6 is the story of Noah, which we're not going to get into Noah until next week, okay? So we're going to cover the fall, Cain and Abel, chapter 5, which is a really boring genealogy, and then the Nephilim, which is that weird little story in chapter 6. How many of you actually read forward to chapter 6?
We read, we studied, we Googled, we discussed.
You're going to stump me tonight, so what you're going to do. And obviously with this, like I always want to make sure this is really clear, like most of 80% of why you read the Bible is to ask the question, what is God trying to tell me now? Okay. Therefore, the answer isn't an answer that is right or wrong. The answer is right for the person, okay? Like 10% of the Bible is like, what was God trying to tell those people then? Okay? And then like the last 10% is like everything else that like theologians deal with like, well, what does archaeology tell us and stuff? So the archaeology and stuff can help inform those other two. But again, the really important question I want to make sure you always are asking yourself when you're reading the Bible is, what is God telling me? Okay. You guys follow? All right.
Yep.
Because if we spend too much time in our heads when we're looking at the Bible, we miss most of what's going on. All right, so I'm going to try to share the screen. Okay. There we are, and I got you in the middle of the slideshow. So let's get you to the beginning of the slideshow, and let's actually begin the slideshow.
Oh, quick question, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Last week, you told us what we did it, and then you told us what we were going to do, and there were slides kind of like what we're looking at now, but then that disappeared, and you said you were going to put this on a certain day, but we never found it again online.
So it went out on Facebook and YouTube Sunday at 11 a.m.
Well, we watched the Sunday service, but we didn't see this Bible study.
Well, it wouldn't have come on until half an hour after the Sunday service concluded.
Okay.
So if you went back now, hopefully you'd find it. If you don't find it, then I will definitely, I can definitely help you get there. What you're going to want to do is just go under videos. If you're, I don't know if you use a TV or a tablet. So if you're or whether or not you're going to YouTube or Facebook, both of them are under playlists called adult education. And you'll actually have all the adult eds that I have recorded there. And it will start with the oldest and move to the newest. So you'll scroll to the bottom to find the newest. I have not figured out how to get it to switch so it files it the opposite way. On YouTube, on Facebook, it goes newest.
We just ended up then watching your Bibles, your bedtime stories.
Oh, that's all right. Do you like the bedtime stories? They're almost done. This will be the last week. Like, it was so hard. I was almost crying, trying to say like, hey guys, the last week bedtime Bible stories. So Monday is the last time. 39 weeks we have done bedtime Bible stories together. But frankly, what Mary is doing is so much better than what I was doing, because I just sort of came up with that like off the cuff early on in COVID. So I'm going to wrap it up this week. But man, it has been fun, and they're all on a playlist called Bedtime Bible Stories. So if you want to relive me doing literally 39 horrible jokes, because that's one of the things in there. In fact, I'll give you a sneak preview.
I won some of the trivia on that thing.
You did win trivia. So the final joke.
Oh.
I made it to the t-shirt. My commemorative t-shirt right here for Bedtime Bible Stories.
Hold it up.
Hold it up again? Okay.
Can't see it.
That's cool.
Where is it?
You're holding up, but it's
A little
not
farther
showing.
up. There you go. A little more. There you go.
Can't see it. Can't see it at all. Yeah.
Says, I keep all my dad jokes in a dad base. It'll hopefully show up really good. I show it off in the final bedtime Bible stories. This Monday, 6 p.m., be there. It's a live experience. It's live the way church is. Let's put it that way. So it's a pre-recorded live experience.
Mhm.
But that one's so fun.
Fun.
All right. Let's jump into Genesis chapters 3 through 6, verse 4. All right. So when we jump into this, what we can see is that chapter 3 is the story of the fall. And I think one of the things that it's worth noting is there is a lot of theology that has gotten sort of thrust onto chapter 3. Like, for example, all Catholic sexual ethics is based on chapter 3 of Genesis and then built out from there, and then goes back into different parts of the Bible to re-argue itself. But chapter 3 is where the entire Roman Catholic Church sort of builds out most of its sexual ethics from, because they're going to say that chapter 3 proves that the original sin is the act of procreation. Okay. I'm going to challenge that and say, really? When you read chapter 3, that's what you get? Because the first thing that happens in chapter 3, after everyone eats the fruit and gets themselves in all sorts of trouble, is that they realize that they're naked. Okay? And what do? They run, build clothes for themselves, and then hide. Okay? So if you're going to try to build an argument that chapter 3 is about original sin, because it could be about something else too, but if you're going to go that route, then I think you've got to at least try to take on what is it that the nakedness is getting at. And I would argue that perhaps if it is talking about original sin, which I think this is getting at that, or at least getting at the concept of sin, maybe not original sin, that the nakedness they aren't initially upset about the fact they're naked, right? They're initially upset about the fact they're naked and God might come by, right? That's why they're hiding. And so I wonder if perhaps the core of evil or the core of sin, or whatever word you want to use, instead of it being sexuality, maybe it's sort of the consciousness about other people's opinions. And there'd be a lot in like happiness economics that would back that. Because you think about how much individual sins are done in the pursuit of money, or in the pursuit of fame, or in the pursuit of social standing, or in the pursuit of beauty. And all those really boil down to what other people think. There was a famous philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and when he was asked what makes something beautiful or what makes something valuable, his response was, two things must exist. One, there must be a limited amount of something. And two, it will be as valuable as it is by how much it is wanted. Mm-hmm. And he would say beauty works the same way. And there would be some evidence that Jean-Jacques Rousseau's view does hold true in psychology. If you look at the beauty industry around the world, in countries that are predominantly fair-skinned, okay, people sell tanning so that you have darker skin, right? Okay, all sorts of cosmetics and tanning booths and all this, even though a lot of that's really unhealthy stuff. Not all of it, but a lot of it is, right? On the others, if you were to go to a place where the majority of people are relatively dark skinned, so you go to countries there, you know what they sell? Bleaching agents. Yeah, right? Because what is beautiful in a country full of folks who have darker skin is lighter skin, and what is beautiful in a country full of folks with lighter skin is darker skin. Because what is beautiful is what is rare and hard to find. But isn't there something messed up about that? Because what you're telling everyone is whatever's in the majority is not valued or not valuable. But we know that's not how God works, right? Because we know that God loves everybody, regardless of all these other things. And if you think about the way like economics works, right? The reason diamonds are valuable is not because they have any real like mechanical use, right? Diamond bit drills the diamonds there can be easily manufactured through chemical means. So in one sense, going and mining a diamond in a modern concept makes zero sense. The only use for a mined diamond is for jewelry or other non-mechanical purposes. And yet, even when they discovered how to make cheap diamonds cheaply through chemicals, the diamond exchange didn't collapse. You would think like if you could cheaply make diamonds, economics would say like they should all be superly not valuable, right? Except for people then go, well, I want real diamonds, not chemically made diamonds. And so the actual value of the diamond isn't driven by laws of supply and demand in the sense of its usefulness, because any industrial usefulness got out of the market and went to the chemical made diamond market. The mined diamond market still is dominated by mostly jewelry. And it's nothing against jewelry, nothing against diamonds, but it shows that like the way humans work is we find things that are beautiful, not because necessarily of some intrinsic value or intrinsic worth, but simply because of its rarity. And think of the social ills that brings upon. Now, I would say that I'm not blaming anyone for having diamonds. I'm not blaming anyone for selling diamonds. I have nothing against the diamond industry. I just use it as an example, and I could have used gold the same way, right? There's very few practical applications to gold. Most of what drives the gold spot price is simply demand for gold's sake. Okay. And so I challenge to say, well, perhaps one other way of looking at this, instead of trying to demonize sexuality, is to maybe say, is there something about liberating ourselves from the expectations of others, or more precisely, our assumption about what others may be thinking about us, that would liberate us faster from many, many types of different roads that lead to all sorts of social ills and sins. You follow sort of what I'm trying to get at there?
Yes.
I can be really convoluted sometimes.
Oh, that's good.
Then the next thing jumped out to me was 3:16. And I want to take a moment to really hit 3:16.
Matt?
Yeah.
One quick thing. In 6 and 7, last week with Genesis 1 and 2, we kind of minimized or put marriage in the background. It was man and woman, and they did what they did, and so forth. In this chapter,
well, I would say I put wedding in the background. Weddings, but
specifically in this chapter, she refers to Adam as her husband, or it is referred as her husband, and vice versa to wife. Those two words are right around
absolutely.
6 and 7.
Absolutely, and absolutely,
Yeah,
and that I think is sorry.
No, just wondering your
Absolutely.
thoughts.
So last week, what I was trying to get at was we need to be, I think, really careful about confusing a marriage, okay, with the ceremony, for lack of a better way of putting it, as a wedding, right? Because a marriage is a sort of organic relational thing that exists over multiple years, hopefully, right? Okay. versus the ceremony of marriage, which is a one-time, however many hours thing that occurs that has both sort of religious, ritualistic meanings, but also has like legal meanings, right?
Yeah.
And so what I was trying to say is there is a lot of focus that occurs on that second part, that sort of ritual dash legal thing that we call marriage. But if we look at it, the concern is about the relational side of marriage, not the actual ceremonial side, is what I was trying to get at. Maybe I didn't do that really well.
No, that's
Because
good.
a lot of folks, like, I mean, being a pastor, there are so many times that I sit down with couples and I'm like, if you spent as much time talking about your marriage as you do your wedding, you would be so much better off. Okay. Like if you guys would put the energy into like before you get married, figuring out like, hey, do you want kids? If so, how many? Or what's your credit score? Like if people spend as much time talking about the sorts of things that cause divorce as they do about like the china at the wedding, we would have a lot less divorces. That's what I was sort of trying to get at. And when you look through the Bible, there's very little push at the ceremony side. There is a lot of discussion over like the family unit, two people becoming one, about the marriage side. You know, what I like to call day 2 to infinity, rather than day 1. Is that fair? Maybe I didn't bring that out enough last time.
Yep, that's good. Thank you.
Makes sense.
I do want to hit 316. That was another thing that jumped out on me. But thank you for the point. The thing that jumped out on me in 316 is this is often used. If you go there, it says, so this is God. He's caught everybody. He knows what's happened. They've eaten of the fruit. And he sort of starts in with a series of curses, right? Okay, this is sort of where we are. We got a series of curses. And he curses everyone in this thing. And in 3:16, he says he turns to the woman, but he's already cursed at this point, I believe, everybody else. Okay. No, he's cursed the snake at this point. Then he curses the woman. He curses the woman, he says, and again, this is just my translation, and every translation does this a little differently. To the woman, he said, I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Okay. This particular statement has been used to justify all sorts of exclusion of women and all sorts of sort of anti-female or anti-women, whatever words you want to use, sort of theology to say that men are superior. See, they're supposed to rule over women. But I would really challenge that. And the reason I challenge that is this. If we were to read the whole section of curses, the first curse is humans and snakes. You guys are going to battle it out. Snakes will not like humans. Humans will not like snakes. Second major curse is directly outlined is childbirth is going to be painful. Then you have the husband will rule over the wife. Then you have farming will be hard if you keep reading. Okay. Then you'll have, by the way, everyone's going to die because you were immortal, but you're not anymore. Okay. These are sort of the 5 basic curses. You can sort of try to read in others. Those are the ones that are super explicit. So I would push back to folks who say, well, husbands should naturally rule over their wives. I'd push back and say, only if you don't believe in modern farming. Okay. Only if when you find a rattlesnake in your garage, you go, hey kids, I can't help you. It's the way it's supposed to be. They're supposed to be trying to bite you and you're supposed to try to hit them with a stick. Good luck, kiddos. Here, have a stick. It only counts if you're willing to say like, sure, everyone's gonna die. It was a curse of God. I'm not gonna take part in medical science. It'll keep me alive longer. Okay. I think those who try to make an argument here are not being particularly genuine because it is very clear, regardless of what version of the Bible you have or how old it is, that we are in the middle of a series of curses. And so unless you're going to be like pro-snake, pro-like Amish level farming, anti-science, you're going to be inconsistent here. Okay. It does bring up an interesting thing to say, is that one of the things that God knows humanity is going to be struggling with? Is this struggle between genders understanding each other? And whether or not part of this is there's going to be a curse that you have different genders, and that there's going to be this inclination for one gender to try to rule over another, and that God is saying, don't do that. Just like God is saying, go figure out how to make farming better. Go figure out how to not get bitten by snakes. Go figure out how to keep people alive. Well, maybe we need to go and figure out how to communicate better, so that there isn't a competition, that there isn't a war on every family at every level. Last one that jumps out to me is 322. This is a really weird statement. It's mostly that it's weird. And it is this statement in you're almost at the end at this point, right? And at least my translation would say, and the Lord God said, the man has now become like one of us. So there's that us again that got pointed out last week.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Okay. This concept of the tree of life is very indigenous to just about all the religions in the area. So that's probably a holdover. But this idea that we are made in God's image, God already knows, like, hey, they ate of this, we can't let them eat of that. I would say brings at least a call to the question when you attach that last week, like I noted, how God was like, whatever you do, don't eat that. Okay, but never says don't eat of the tree of life. He just says don't eat of the tree of good and evil, or knowledge of good and evil. That perhaps this entire setup isn't so much a war between the snake and God as it perhaps is God's plan starting. Maybe part of God's plan is to have the fall in the first place. Now, folks will usually be like, come on, really? I say, listen, hear me out on this. God, when you read the whole Bible, the thing that God is always sort of pushing at is that God wants relationship with us, right? And God wants a very particular relationship. He wants us to love him because he loves us, right? Like a parent loves a child. God has this yearning and this amazing love for us, just like when you have a kid, right? And I know parents who, at least as a parent, I know that there's always this sort of fear that maybe our child will grow up and not love us back. And so I wonder if what you have is God going, I love these humans so much, but if they stay in the garden, they will never understand what love is. Why? Because you can't make someone love you, even if you're God. Because for it to be love, the person has to choose it, right? Because if they don't have the freedom of choice, whatever's happening, that ain't love. And so maybe but to have freedom, you have to have a choice, right? If you only have one choice, it's not actually freedom. So maybe you have to have good and you have to have evil so that you can have freedom, so that people can experience love. And maybe all the evil and all the suffering and all that is worth it. Because without it, there isn't love. And I'd argue that this plays out in our own life. My personal experience has been it is always better to love and then later get hurt than to not love at all in the first place. because there is no regret sort of deeper than the relationship missed. And this doesn't mean you have to be a doormat. It doesn't mean you have to let yourself get abused. It doesn't mean any of that, okay? Because that's not love. But we all probably have those moments in our life where we missed out on getting to know a good friend or partner or whatever that person would have become because we didn't ask, or we didn't open up, or we didn't talk. And even in relationships that are loving relationships, you've got to recommit to that all the time, right? Those of you who are married, you've got to recommit to that. Because a lot of marriages, like, people start off talking and loving and reflecting with each other, and then years go by and they stop talking and they stop reflecting and they stop sharing their emotions and their days together, and they drift away, and then they wake up someday and they're like, who are you? And then you got to make a decision of, is that person even someone you want to stay with? And can you fall back in love? And some people do and some people don't, and that's life. And there's pain in all sorts of different ways, but man, love is just, it's great when you have it. And this is an amazing blessing, right? So that's where I come from. That's what I get from chapter 3, is just this amazing sense that that's how much God loves us, that he's willing to risk everything. And only 3 chapters in. What other things jump to you from chapter 3?
Well, I never realized it said that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and also the tree of life, that they were 2 separate things.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, right? It's worth noting the Greeks and the Babylonians and a number of other folks would have had some concept of the tree of life. So this would have been a term that would have been normal for just about all the different cultures that the Israelites, when this is written, are around.
Mm-hmm. Is that also, is that used in Revelation?
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I was wondering if that was also in Revelation.
I believe it is, but I would have to look. I'd have to go look. I'd have to grab a concordance and double check that. But it sounds right to me, but that doesn't mean a lot.
Sounds right to me too.
Anything else that jumped out to folks from 3? I told you I do thought-provoking stuff. There's a lot of traditional stuff I'm sure you've all heard before. It's all valid. It's just I like to try to bring a different take.
You're talking about it last week.
I thought in verses 12 and 13 where you had them, blaming each other, and even blaming God, man saying, well, she gave it to you, you gave her to me, and blaming each other. And it made me think of, how many times we do that still today. Refuse to accept blame, that our own blame, but also blaming God. It was an act of God. You can't explain it. It must have been God that done it. We still do that today.
Absolutely, man. I don't know. I have 3 sisters. We used to play the "they did it" game all the time. Right? It is so natural to humanity. No, that's a really good insight. Other thoughts? I'm hearing something, but I can't tell if someone's talking. No? Okay. You guys ready to go to chapter 4?
Yes.
All right. So chapter 4, Kane and Abel. Most of us have probably read this one before or encountered this story before. Maybe not. This is one of those I like to say, like, there's the handful of stories everyone reads when they're a little kid in Sunday school. This isn't so much a Sunday school story, but it's sort of most people run across it at some point, or at least hear a reference to it. One thing that I think gets people off in the wrong track is not realizing why God is mad. I see it when I lead Bible studies, that has been a place where people get stuck, right? Because if you go to 4:2-8, it sort of explains, like, this is who Abel is, this is who Cain is, Abel's bringing this, Cain's bringing that, and God gets mad at Cain's offering. Okay. Now, I will tell you that I don't buy the argument that meat is better than vegetables and fruit. This is not a pro-carnivore like statement. No matter what some of my folks in Nebraska used to like to joke about, that this is not a disproving of vegetarianism. So that was a joke. Yeah, like no laughs. Okay, that's all right. I'll take pity laughs. I'm okay with that. So the situation is this. If you look at what Abel brings the best of what he has, right? He kills a calf. Okay. That's foregoing all the potential of that cow. All right. Cain brings like, oh man, I gotta go bring some stuff here, have some fruit. Okay. Now we all know when you bring a gift to someone, there's a huge difference between the person who says, you know, hey honey, I thought through what you really wanted and what you really like and what you really don't, and I picked this gift out. And we've all had people who've hopefully given us really awesome gifts, or at least tried really hard to give us really awesome gifts, right? But we've also gotten the gift from the person who's like, yeah, on my way home, I got you an air freshener. Yeah. Right? We've all had like that level of gift. And the problem isn't that the air freshener is awful, though it was a horrible gift. Or that the other one is great, whatever it is. It has to do with how much thought and what was behind it, right? And so I think to me, what this setup really is a talk about generosity. Abel went ahead and was thinking about God, thinking about what God wanted, thinking about what God needed, and then sacrificed something that would have been valuable to Abel. Whether or not it was valuable to God, it was valuable to Abel. And he brought it out of generosity to God. Because there would have needed to have been a lot of thought and a lot of preparation. And slaughtering a calf is a lot of work, especially when you're talking by hand in those days. Okay. A lot more work than, oh man, it's just about time to run to church. I better grab some apples. Okay. And so I think what they're trying to get at is that God's like, dude, Cain, you're not getting it. It isn't about the act or the ritual. It's about what you're bringing to it. Okay. And that's true at church, right? Like what you bring to church is way more important than showing up to church. Because the difference between not showing up and not listening isn't that big of a difference, right? We've all met the person who has gone to church for like 30 years religiously every week, and then you ask them a question and you're like, have you heard none of the sermons for the past 23 years? Like my dad is an Episcopal priest. He gave a sermon talking about how Christians should help the poor. He had a person who has been a member of that church for like 30 years in a previous church that he was in, walk up to him and say, that's not in the Bible. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. Really? Jesus said help the poor? And he's like, yeah, like literally 700 plus places in the Bible. Like Jesus himself, let alone the prophets and everyone, says help the poor. And you just got to wonder, like, where has that dude been? Because you've all probably known a number of preachers, right, left, or center, and they all say, help the poor, right?
Pretty much.
Pretty much, right? Yeah, that's what I mean. And so I think that's what he's getting at, is that when we go, when we engage, we should actually be there. Not just performing a ritual, not just going through the motions, because that isn't actually what God wants. God wants us to be there. Because a relationship is about being there, not about doing the right motions at the right moments. It's worth noting that God, a lot of them say that God is angry or God is upset. But God's reaction to me doesn't seem angry or upset. It seems like a worried parent. like the parent that sees their kid hanging out with all the other kids who are smoking cigarettes, but they don't see their kid smoking cigarettes, but they go, ooh, this isn't going to end well, right? Because what he does is he goes to Kane and he says basically, but if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. Okay? That's not a statement of condemnation. He's not saying that Cain is sinning. He's saying, Cain, if you just get to the point where you're going through the motions, you are starting to enter a dangerous place, because going through the motions and then sort of falling off the path is a really easy thing to do. And that's true at work, right? Like, we've all known the employee or the employer who's just going through the motions, and it doesn't take that long before something goes really sideways. Or in relationships, or in our personal spiritualities, going through the motions, well, that's nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. Should be a personal alarm to us that something's wrong. By the way, it usually means you're exhausted, or you're tired, or you're hurting in some way. You know? And then, of course, if you know the rest of the story, Cain kills Abel. So that thing that was crouching at the door clearly won. It's also worth noting, well, Cain does get punished. He is still redeemed. God does not just cast him out and say, that's it, you killed Abel, out of here. If you keep reading, he ends up getting married, having kids, God protects him, the whole shebang. And he goes on to be the father of a whole nation. So, well, there is punishment because he does have to leave, and he is cast out of one land. God doesn't ever actually abandon him. In fact, God keeps him safe and redeems him sort of in another story, in another place. Thoughts?
We had a question about the descendants of Adam and Eve, where it says the spirit world people or the beautiful earth women.
I'm sorry,
Where do they
what verse
come
are you in?
Well, I didn't write down the verse, but talks about the descendants of Adam and Eve.
You're talking about the descendants of God. Are you in chapter 6? Because in chapter 6, you have when man began to increase in numbers on earth, the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yep.
No worries. No worries. You're just ahead of me. You're just ahead of me on that. We will get to that. We're going to spend a whole slide on just those 4 verses because it is such a weird little, like, bizarre thing.
What
Do you
does,
mind holding
what
off
does
for
the
just
name? Oh, sure.
What?
What does the name Satan mean? And is Lucifer different from Satan?
Is Satan and Lucifer the same thing? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Mhm.
You know, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at the Hebrew. I didn't look that up beforehand. Let me see if my study Bible has any notes in it.
She say Lucifer.
Mhm. Lucifer and Satan.
I will need to go back and look at that. Remind me next week, because I am not.
You think I'm gonna?
I'll write that down. Is Lucifer and Satan in Genesis the same Hebrew?
Yeah.
My guess is that it is.
Okay.
Different versions like to jump back and forth, but I will have to double check that because I don't know I don't generally go that deep unless something cues me that I should dig down to the Hebrew level. But that's a good question because they do switch back and forth between Lucifer and Satan. Generally, the general understanding is, and again, I don't know if they're 2 different words. The general understanding is that you're talking about the same character. The Lucifer, Satan, Beelzebub, these are just different names for the devil.
Okay.
But if they're switching back and forth, sometimes it is an indication that you have 2 different words going on, and those do sometimes matter. So I'll get back to you on that. That's a great one. You stumped me, Marianne. You get extra point today. Redeemable for.
I think maybe Richard was the one that brought that up.
Okay, Richard, you get a point. Redeemable for nothing.
Hooray!
One God point for you. Unfortunately, God does not accept God points. All right. Are we okay moving to chapter 5? All right. Chapter 5. Now, I will be honest, one of the best Bible studies I ever ran was run 5 a.m. in the morning with 40, it ended up growing 20 to 40 farmers that would show up. It was an all-male group for, most of the time. But these guys had come to me and said, if you're willing to be up in time to get to us before we go to the field, then we'll do a Bible study with you. I don't think ever thought I'd say yes to that. So, and so we'd literally move. We'd be 1 hour before everyone went to the field, which obviously changes as the seasons do. And so we would scoot all the way out to noon. Actually, yeah, we'd scoot all the way out to like 10, 11, 12, noon. Then we'd work our way all the way back to about 4 in the morning. And then they would get going so early, they would say, hey, can I catch you at lunchtime at noon? So I knew things were really bad in the summer when they said, hey, can we move to noon? Because that's when we'll come back for lunch. Or they would say dinner.
Yeah, dinner.
All right. But I will say one of the weirdest things that ever happened is we got stuck for like 2 hours on chapter 5 of Genesis as a group because of the ages of all these folks who are stated. Okay. So I want to just take on the age question because it's honestly the only thing that that usually trips anyone up if they're even going to get tripped up at chapter 5. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you look at the ages, these people live like 912 years. That seems insane when you first read it, right? So there are 3 classical explanations to this. One classical explanation, which is the oldest, is to try to say that these are symbolic. In other words, that you look at the numbers and you do some sort of formula and this equals that, which then is a holy number. So some of these you can derive down to 777 or 666 or whatever if you do enough funky math, okay? The problem is if you apply that same logic to all the numbers, it doesn't get you anything but nonsense except for maybe 2 or 3 times. So it seems unlikely that you'd have this sophisticated mathematical formula that works 3 times and fails the other like 9 times. Okay. But could it be true? Sure. And people who go with that theory will point to all sorts of mathematical things that you find in ancient world, and a lot of that's true. Some of it's a little forced, but okay. The second answer that became really popular for a while was to argue that it was because they were based off of a lunar calendar. Okay, so when they were thinking a year, what they actually meant was something closer to a month. Okay, because that's how long it takes to go from new moon to new moon, about. Okay, I think it's technically like 28 and a half days or something weird like that. Okay, and again, if you take that and you apply it to a number of them, particularly the ones that are like in the 900s, you come out with some pretty reasonable numbers. In fact, all the old numbers reduce very nicely. And so people are dying like their 60s and 70s, which, okay, that makes some sense. That's old, especially in the ancient world, but not unheard of, okay? However, then you take the folks when they say so-and-so begot such and such when they were such and such and then they died. If you take that and you put it on the begotten numbers, you have some folks having kids at some really early ages, especially when you consider that due to the lack of nutrition in the ancient world, usually puberty was delayed from what we would know now. So it becomes you have a problem on the other end of, yeah, some of these folks are like 12 and having kids. I mean, that's not impossible, but in the ancient world, that would be pretty hard to do. Because, well, yeah, most people here in the modern world with modern nutrition, 12 is not unheard of, though for puberty, it's not actually that horribly abnormal in the because I think the average is something like 13 and a half or something like that. if you go to a place where there's large amounts of malnutrition, like there would have been in this world, puberty usually moves out closer to 16, 17, 18. So it becomes a little to enter history into that. Could it be true? Absolutely. Is it biologically impossible? By no means. But the lunar calendar theory, at least, I think, has a legitimate argument against. Now, obviously, you've always had people say, well, maybe he just lived to 920. Maybe he did. I have no idea. I would mostly argue that the numbers probably don't really matter, that what they're probably trying to convey is that these are really old patriarchs of the church, of society. These lines are going to be important in establishing the line of David all the way back to the line of Adam. The exact years and dates very well could have been exaggerated over time to intimidate your enemies. We over here in our tribe lived 900 years old. How about you? Okay. I don't know. My basic answer is I have no clue why the guy's like, why it says 920 years. I'm not sure I care. I'm not sure we should ever care. I don't know. What are your all's thoughts?
Rolled off the tongue so easily. Just, random number.
Random number. I think he was really at 970. That seems right for Grandpa, right?
Yeah.
A 7-year-old thinks so.
A 70-year-old thinks so.
Grandma, were you there when the dinosaurs were there?
Right.
Yeah.
In Haley's Bible handbook, there's a reference with these chapters from Babylonian history of 10 kings that reigned from 10,000 to 60,000 years. So these aren't so old.
Well, and that was a popular thing. Just like everyone had a giant that fought for them back then, everyone's king lived forever. All the Roman emperors were immortal. They just kept getting killed.
I thought when I was reading and they would say, how old they lived, and then it was, and he died. And then they would tell how long they lived.
And he died.
Until it got to Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
He moved away.
24, and it was that he walked with God, then he was no more because God took him.
Yes.
So it doesn't say that he died, that God took him.
So, okay, this actually gets into so that's actually really good. I forgot about that, but that's actually a really good point, Phyllis. Okay, so one of the arguments that goes on is whether or not, when it comes to the concept of the souls, whether or not there's soul sleep, which is this idea you sort of go to sleep and then you wake up and it's the final day, or whether or not you go to heaven, hang out with God. Okay. One of the arguments, and I'm very much a believer you go to heaven and hang out with God. My father's very much soul sleep. So this is a debate we love to have. One of the arguments that I will pull back to is to note folks like Enoch. Because I would argue, we know there's a heaven and we know that humans go there because we have these points throughout the Bible, like Elijah being carried by the chariot, where people don't die. But they're not on earth. I mean, Enoch's not walking around right now. So where else are they going, if not heaven? So no, that's a really good one. I had forgotten that's where Enoch was from. Good catch.
And a commentary that I had looked at, it talked about the, just living versus walking with God, and that there's, a great difference between the two.
Good point. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Kind of like just showing up and sitting in the pew and not really getting anything out of it.
Hey, I like it. There you go. See, This is why I love Bible studies, because I learn stuff too. See? No, that's awesome. Other things you guys get out of chapter
And we're
5?
sure, and we're sure going with God. It wasn't the spaceship came by and I mean,
Not touching that with a like 20-foot pole. All right, so let's take on chapter 6. If you guys are ready to move on from chapter 5, unless you have other things you want to comment on. We good? Can you all hear me?
yes, we're good.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you guys just were. No one was saying anything, and I always fear my mic's going out or something. All right, chapter 6, very controversial one. It's the one I've been promising you all, the one where we talk about angels and sex. Okay, I know you all were just waiting for this. So here we go. I'm just going to read the 4 to you really quickly. When men began to increase in number on the earth, the daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man, contend with man forever, and he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Okay, now this little chunk, when you talk to folks who do like textual criticism, trying to see like where did different parts of the Bible come from, is an unknown text chunk. It is written in a style that is different than everything that comes before and everything that comes after. So it is a story that has come into the Bible at some point in history. We are really unsure. We don't really know where it comes from, or why it's inserted really between Noah and the genealogy that gets you from Cain and Abel to Noah. Okay, it's just odd little story, and it's written stylistically, like when you actually look at the actual Hebrew and everything, differently than the Noah story. So they're pretty darn sure that it wasn't initially attached to the Noah story. And when you read it, it doesn't fit, right? Like you could easily cut 1 and 4 and just start the Noah story with the Lord saw how great man's wickedness on earth had become, right? And you could start there and it'd be a solid story all by itself, right? The first part almost doesn't fit, which is why I wanted to cut it right there. I think there's a danger. So historically, because of this, the church has never read it. We don't read it in the lectionary. You could go to every service. You could do morning, evening, noon, and compline for 3 straight years. You will never read this because we don't like to talk about it in the church. It's part of what got washed out when the whitewashing occurred. A, because no one wants to sit down and think about angel sex, but B, because no one knows what to do with this little fragment. So here's my answer, having spent some time with this fragment. Sons of God. Many Bibles will try to throw sons of God rather than angels in there. Some will use the word angels. I honestly argue that I think the NIV made the wrong decision. They should have gone with angels. Why? Because, well, sons of God is a legitimate, very literal translation of the Hebrew. Every other place that Hebrew word pops up in the Bible, we translate it as angels. Okay, this is the same Hebrew word you're going to find when you get to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in just a few chapters. Okay, when 2 angels come down and they are sent to Sodom and Gomorrah to check things out. That you could also it's the same word that's being used here. So if you're going to use it to be angels in one place, you got to use it for angels in another place. And there's a number of other places where that is true. I just got an alert that my internet's unstable, so let me know if I break up, okay? So sons of God, I think, should be translated as angels. But I think there is a point to this, a point that gets lost if we get too sucked into the details of the first part. I think the point comes down to when you look at the word Nephilim. The word Nephilim in Hebrew translates as fallen ones. However, they're also noted that they are the heroes of old, men of renown. Okay. Sometimes they will be almost, you'll translate almost as like Hercules. Okay, like some Bibles will say such as Hercules or such as, or will have that in parentheses. Now that I think that's an addition that really isn't in the text itself. Okay, but you'll find Bibles that will sort of try to explain what is meant by heroes of old, men of renown. Okay, so they'll go that direction for explanation purposes. Isn't really in the original Hebrew. But I think that is where the story actually has an impact on how we live our lives or how we can view the world. Because if you think about it, if God is referring to this group as fallen ones, but then says these are the heroes of man, men of renowns, maybe the lesson is to remind us that there is a danger, not that it's wrong or immoral, but that there's a danger in hero worship, which would be very consistent with our Lutheran theology, because as Lutherans, we would say that people are both saint and sinner, that all people are. No one is without sin, right? And one of the dangers of looking at someone as a hero is that we only bring out their saintly side and we ignore their sinful side. And think about it. Like, world history is full of stories of someone who is really good at something, whether or not it's making art or throwing a football or singing beautifully or producing movies or whatever. Someone who's the top of their field in something, who then uses that hero worship they get because they're the top of their field to then go abuse people. And the world, because they want to only see the good side of this person, ignores the abuse and the bad things they're doing on the side. There's a danger if we over accentuate anyone's goodness, and there's a danger if we over accentuate anyone's badness, right? There are people write off and they shouldn't, but there is a danger in saying, oh, this guy is great at golf, he must be a horribly moral person, should tell me wonderful things about politics or ethics or whatever. Or to say, oh, but he's such an amazing sports star, he couldn't have possibly done XYZ. Yeah. And we've all probably experienced that, right? Either directly or at least by just knowing current events in world history. And so to me, that's the point of this, is that God looks at these heroes of old, men of renown, and goes, oh man, these are fallen ones like everybody else. They did their heroic things, they did the things they're renowned for, and that is good. But like everybody else, they are fallen ones. What's your thoughts? What do you think? I mean, this is just sort of my guess as to what this is trying to get at. But I could easily be wrong. I have lots of people in my family who will agree with that statement. My wife, my kids, my parents, my sisters.
When you were talking about, the danger of hero worship, thinking in terms of what's kind of been happening recently in our history, where people are tearing down statues, and people are kind of looking at studying, well, who should monuments be put up for and who shouldn't? And even names like Abraham Lincoln, George Washington have come up of people saying, well, should there really be monuments for those people? Today, if someone decides to run for, say, political office, people look back and Google and find out that when they were 16 years old, they said such and such a words. It's hard to look, and everybody's a sinner, but we also change. So when you're 16, what you said and what you believe is necessarily what you feel and believe today as an adult.
Absolutely. And I wasn't, and that's what I mean, like, that's why I said it's a balance, because you can go the other way, right? Where all you see is the sin, but you don't see the goodness in someone.
Good. Yep.
You know, but we've also like we've all heard the story of the high school quarterback who's on the fast track to doing something and then goes and does something horribly illegal or horribly immoral or gets drunk and hits someone with their car or something. And the small town is like, oh, maybe we should let it slide because isn't Johnny such a good guy? You know what I mean? Like that's more the scenario I was talking about. Or the Hollywood mogul who, you know, horribly treats everyone awful around them. Like The Devil Wears Prada. If you've ever seen that show.
Yes.
Right? Like she treats everyone or that movie. She treats everyone just horribly, right? But everyone lets her do it because she's so good at her job. Presumably, at least.
Awful. Prada, the boss of Prada.
What were you saying, Marianne? So no, good point, Phyllis. Like, again, you got to have a balance because you can go too far the other direction.
Yep.
A quick question. If in the translation, the sons of God are translated as angels, it still then says that they were married to any of them that they chose. What's the implication there of marriage between angels and apparently non-angels?
It's possible is the implication, I guess. Like, the answer is I don't like. It's possible. So let's go with it. It's possible, and obviously they can have kids. Okay. So I mean, I don't want to dig down too far. I try to keep this PG territory. And then but it's worth noting that God does not seem keen on it. Right?
Right.
God's sort of like, this isn't okay. And so seems to say, okay, you all have fallen in love, presumably. We have these marriages occurring. They're creating children. We'll let it slide. Let's not do this anymore afterwards or something along. I mean, we have 4 verses. We don't really know. We just sort of know that God could have been like, that's it. You all are coming back up here with me, right? But he doesn't. God could have punished the angels. He doesn't seem to. You could sort of maybe argue that this is only going to go on for so long as a punishment. He definitely doesn't seem happy with it. So I'm not sure how much we can infer from it. I mean, God doesn't like it, but not enough to punish him, but does sort of put a time limit on it.
120 years, my version says.
Yeah. Which that might just mean a lifetime.
Right.
Like, okay, you guys have fallen in love, or you guys are down there, you have kids, you know what? Live a lifetime out. But we're not going to do this again. Some people would argue that the angels become mortal at that point. I think that, again, when you're dealing with such little text that is vague about things, you can speculate easily. And speculation, I think, can be very spiritually fulfilling. I think you always have to be honest, you're sort of speculating.
I kind of feel like you just, in 4 verses, let's make it up as we go.
Yeah, though I will say that there is a lot of, if
outside your class, royalty with royalty, commoners. Wait a minute, you mixed angels and dirt.
Well, and we don't know why God doesn't seem to like this. And without a lot of knowledge of where this came from or what its background is, that makes it harder on a lot of academicians to sort of presume what it's getting at or going for. Because it seems, again, not particularly connected to the story of Cain and Abel, because it doesn't involve any of the characters from Cain and Abel or Adam or Eve or any of the people from genealogy in 5. Nor does it involve any of the people you're going to meet in the Noah story. So you can presume that Noah has no idea or only knows about it in past tense, and you can assume that like Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, that whole crew were long dead before this occurred or never knew about it. You know what I mean? Like, this sort of happens independently of those two other things which flow. Because Adam and Eve to Cain and Abel to Noah, that all flows, right? This doesn't necessarily flow. The genealogy doesn't lead you here the way it leads you to Noah's story.
How about this idea, Matt? The angels were God's messengers. Maybe the simple story here is that these messenger angels came to earth to create more messengers.
That could be it too. I've heard that argument too. That's a good argument. So like one of the arguments, if you're going to go for a more literal thing, you run into trouble, right? Because you have Adam and Eve and they have kids. Well, who do the kids marry? Where do these other folks come from? And so one of the possible answers is, okay, so angels fill in for a period of time until you have enough humans. But then God says, okay, we got enough humans, let's stop doing this. It pulls it back. Because some people will say, because it stands alone, maybe it should have gone before chapter 5. Maybe this should have been the end of the Cain and Abel story. And if it was at the end of the Cain and Abel story before the genealogy, then that would make really good sense. But this could also stand sort of alongside the genealogy as an explanation of where did all these other people come from in the genealogy. No, that's a valid line of argumentation of what this is about too.
The one thing that occurred to me, just kind of briefly, was it gives a little bit more of a connection between the human and the spiritual world, whereas typically that's pretty far apart. So I don't know, it just gave a little more of an insight.
Absolutely. No, I like that. That's a good insight. Let me switch these. I just got the warning that they're about to go out because I didn't charge them enough. I told you I have this problem. So give me just one quick second here.
What did you ask?
I'll tell you afterwards. Is I think wrapping up. Who was that?
Okay.
Probably wondering why.
All right, can you guys hear me again?
Yeah,
All right. Oh, you seem disappointed. You're like, oh man.
well, it's better the other way.
It's better the other way,
Yeah.
significantly.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep trying.
She said.
All
See,
right.
my take on this one was, I kind of keyed in on the fallen ones. And to me, that meant fallen angels and under the rule of Satan and the further corruption of man and the human race, and which kind of led even more and more up to the flood and why God destroyed humankind.
Absolutely. I mean, that is another very traditional read of maybe what's going on. Is that this is
Microphones are very good.
result of the fall, not necessarily of just humanity, but of the fall of
Can't
Satan.
hear your microphone, Matt.
Oh man.
At last,
Can you hear me
Matt.
now?
Here,
Yep.
can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All
Better.
right. Sorry, I just have to click things until it works. This is why Tom likes me to charge my stuff. That is a very traditional answer. It's a good answer. Like that's one of them I've run across before. It would be one way to say like, okay, so you've had the fall of humanity. Maybe this is harkening back to the fall of Satan initially, which again would argue, well, maybe this got misplaced in the thing. Maybe this should have gone back towards like chapter 2, chapter 3 territory, because it might be an explanation of Satan. and or at least the results of the fall, though it could also be in its proper place here, as you point out, because you're right. The next thing we're going to talk about is that humanity has sort of descended into this wickedness, and God's going to destroy the world as part of what occurs with Noah. Absolutely. What other things you guys thinking? I love hearing from folks. So if not, I will move on to the last slide. Seeing no objections. Oh man, I'm a smart guy. Put y'all's faces right over. All right, next time at Book Club Bible Study, what I want you guys to do is finish reading all of chapter 6, which is the rest of chapter 6 is the Noah story. Chapter 7, continuing the Noah story. Chapter 8, continuation of the Noah story. Now 6, 7, and 8 are going to be the Noah story that you grew up with, right? The nice, comforting animals on an ark. You know, so many cubics here, so many cubics there. Probably more cubics than you remember. Then we're going to get to chapter 9. Chapter 9 is mostly got whitewashed out of the Bible. I want you to spend special attention at the absolute end when it comes to the curses that are occurring with that occur from Noah to his sons. Okay, because I honestly think that one of the deepest parts of the Noah story gets missed because it exists in chapter 9 for humanity. All right, any questions before we wrap up for the day, or for the evening, I should say?
Good time together.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, same time. I see. Is next week the first Thursday of the month? No. It's only the 18th, right? All right. So next time, same channel. We'll take that on. Then on the 4th, just know that we'll be doing pub theology. You guys are always welcome to that. It's not a Bible study, but we take on a different question every month. And it can be whatever anyone put in, and then we vote on it. So we will be taking on, I think we're taking on yours, right, Marianne? Didn't we vote last time to take on what is Marcionism, right? And does it still exist today?
Yes.
So if you've ever wondered about your 3rd century heresies, we're taking the biggest one on, good old Bishop Marcion. But that's in 2 weeks. So next week, still more Bible study. Okay. All right. Well, you guys have a great evening. I'm going to stop recording now, and then you guys can say whatever you want, not have to worry.